Is it time to reimagine your future? The right business skills may make a difference in your career. At Palla University, we offer a relevant education that's designed to focus on what you need to know in the business world. We'll teach professional skills to help you pursue your goals, like business management, strategic planning, and effective communication. And you can apply these skills right away. A different future is closer than you think with Palla University. Learn more at capella.edu.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. The holidays are here, and you know what that means? It's time to get your friends and family the gifts they deserve. Take the stress out of shopping with Amazon's great deals and low prices on a huge range of items from toys to tech and much more. Whoever you're gifting for, Amazon has great prices on everything you need this holiday season. Shop Black Friday week starting November 21st.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Palla, and I welcome you to a new episode of Dpen Crimes. I'm really excited because during my active research phase for the podcast, I've uncovered some elements I wasn't aware of, thanks to a really interesting website on the subject. I have to say right off the bat, the site takes a guilt-focused stance, claiming that Amanda Knox and Rafael Solicito are guilty, or at the very least, involved. Now, I still don't know what my final opinion will be on this because I admit I don't have a clear answer. Regardless, I'll share the link to that site, but I'll also include links to sites that advocate for their innocence, because it's important to maintain a balance in all the narratives we explore. But let's start from a different angle. Let's begin with Rudy Guede. You might be wondering why we're starting with Rudy Guede. Well, just the other night, exactly Sunday night, my girlfriend was listening to a podcast about this case, and then she wanted to watch, for the first time, Rudy Guede's interview with Franca Leocini. I, of course, have seen it for the 145th time. However, each time, I like to focus not so much on what Rudy says, but on how he says it, the gestures, the expressions, and the tone of voice. And I realized that there are things that just don't fit in with his version of events. This episode of the podcast is titled, Even the Evidence Lies. Because, as we'll see, we'll reflect on this concept. We know, or at least I think I know, that many of the key players in this story, not just Rudy, but also Solicito, Knox, and even some law enforcement officials, have lied. But maybe we should consider that even the evidence, in a sense, could be lying. But let's start with Rudy. Rudy tells a story that, when we hear it, makes us visualize a precise scene. Think about it. When you listen to his interview with Franca Leocini, a mental picture forms in your mind of what happened. We create a clear image of what Rudy describes, a story that, on the surface, seems logical and coherent. In fact, I'd say it's almost too coherent. After re-watching the interview with my girlfriend, there was something that didn't sit right with me. So, I went to YouTube to find the forensic video related to the crime scene. Not just Meredith's room, but the entire house. At one point, Rudy says, "When I heard the scream, I jumped up, quickly pulled up my pants, let's say, and ran from the big bathroom at the end of the hallway to Meredith's room. I came across a figure right there in front of Meredith's room, and we had a confrontation. Not a real confrontation, but a quick exchange of movements. Rudy claims he fell backward because his pants, not being fastened during the commotion, slipped down. He then fell into the living room of the house. At that moment, the two people he later identifies as Raffaele Solicito and Amanda Knox exchanged a few words and then fled. Rudy says, "I go into Filomena Romanelli's room and see them leaving." Said like that, the story seems to hold up. It makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, if you listen to it that way, without being familiar with the layout of the house, it could seem coherent. Of course, I've never been in that house. I've never seen it in person, but at first glance, the narrative seems to hold together. But there's something that doesn't add up for me. I was sure I had seen footage of the house and remembered an important detail. That house is really small, truly very small. 4 people lived there, but the space was cramped. In my mental reconstruction, which is my personal interpretation, everyone has their own, I pictured the living room and kitchen as a fairly large space, with enough room for Rudy to fall and the other 2 to pass by at a distance of 2 or 3 meters, or at least about a meter. However, When I went back and looked at the footage of the scene, I realized that the living room and kitchen are tiny. When Rudy comes out of the bathroom, it takes him at most 5 or 7 steps to cross the living room and reach the hallway threshold. This hallway is very short. There are only 2 rooms, and it's really brief. So, from the hallway, Rudy can't possibly miss the figure in front of him, even if the lighting is dim. With the light on in the room, it's practically impossible not to see that person clearly. But let's suppose that, facing away, Rudy can't see them clearly. When Rudy talks about this confrontation, which isn't a real physical confrontation but rather a moment of surprise, he says he fell backward. Now, if we consider the layout of the house, anyone who was in that room, one or more attackers, would have to pass over him or very close to him to get out the door. Rudy falls in the living room and kitchen, where to his left is a table with a circular bench, and to his right is the kitchen. There isn't enough space to pass too far to the right or left. Therefore, basically, anyone who was there would have to pass over him or very close, so close that Rudy couldn't possibly miss seeing them clearly. But he certainly couldn't confuse whether it was one person or 2. This raises a question. At first, Rudy talks about a single attacker, and then, a few months later, he adds that he saw a female figure, which he then identifies for sure as Amanda Knox. Now, I can understand that in a chaotic situation, it might be hard to identify people perfectly, but it's not plausible that he couldn't even distinguish whether it was 1 or 2. I'll tell you more. In one of his early statements, Rudy claims to have seen the attacker over Meredith from the hallway, but from there, you can't see inside Meredith's room. You can only see the entrance, the door, but not the interior of the room. This is an important detail, and the more I think about it, the more it seems impossible that what Rudy says could be true. At least not physically. The door is actually behind Rudy, and there's no way one or more attackers could pass without him clearly seeing them. From where that person was standing, there's no way to leave without practically stepping over Rudy. At that moment, Rudy could have blocked them, struck them, or at least run immediately to Meredith to check on her. This detail also made me think, thanks to an observation from my girlfriend. What's the point of saying that these 2 people, according to Rudy, fled, and he watched them from the window of Filomena Romanelli's room? Why do this? Why not lock the door or immediately run to Meredith to see how she was? This detail, where Rudy claims he went to Filomena Romanelli's room to look outside, almost seems like a way of saying, I saw them clearly. I can't be mistaken. It feels like a construction, an invention to reinforce his version of events. But all these little details seem to indicate a story that fits a bit too neatly. It does explain some things like the feces found at the crime scene, but it's a version that seems too perfect, too linear. And that's precisely why, in my opinion, it doesn't add up. This question obsessed me. I thought about it constantly. So yesterday, I went back to read how the trial judge, in Rudy's case, dismantled his theories. It's really interesting because the judge questions several points in Rudy's narrative. I'll attach a very detailed document, maybe tomorrow or the day after, but it's worth a read. Essentially, the judge says, Rudy, what you're claiming isn't clear. First, you say you met Meredith at a bar 3 months before. Then you change your story and say the meeting happened at a friend's house. Finally, you go back to saying it was at a bar. Fine, let's say you saw her there. But none of your friends or Meredith's friends confirmed that they saw each other that night, that they kissed, or that they made plans. No one confirms it, and you keep insisting. This detail is already pretty strange. But going back to Zapp's argument, I understand the reasoning. Seeing 2 people in the house, you might think they're thieves, not murderers, and therefore you might want to see where they're fleeing to before realizing that the girl in the other room is dying. Sure, that makes sense. However, it's still a fact that there are too many elements in Rudy's story that don't fit, and the judge has rightly called those into question. The judge points out that it's already strange that there's no evidence of this encounter, the kiss, or the agreement to meet up the next day. Rudy claims he was with one group and Meredith with another, but none of the people present confirm this story. Then there's the issue of the time. Rudy provides different accounts. At one point, he says he arrived at 7 o'clock, but it turns out Meredith wasn't even there at that time, so he claims he went to grab a kebab. In another statement, he changes the time again, showing a lack of precision. The judge then confronts him with another inconsistency. You're meeting up with a girl you kissed the night before, but you don't have a condom? It's hard to imagine you wouldn't have one. These details are thought-provoking because they highlight how Rudy's version is full of inconsistencies and lacks coherence. Meanwhile, I'm responding to the comments we've received. Venue says that, although it's not entirely logical, he finds it understandable that Rudy went to the window in such a chaotic situation. Alberto, who I greet, adds, also because a murder isn't the first thing on your mind.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. From the co-director of Shrek and the visionary behind Toy Story comes Spellbound, a magical new animated adventure starring Rachel Zegler, John Lithgow, Jennifer Lewis, Nathan Lane, and Titus Burgess with Javier Bardem and Nicole Kidman. When a powerful spell turns her parents into monsters, Princess Elian must journey into the wild to reverse the curse before it's too late. Watch Spellbound only on Netflix November 22nd.
How about some fresh out of the oven gingerbread, bright snowdrop, fresh Iowa pine, and cool peppermint to put you in the holiday cleaning spirit? Made with goodness, not a lot of nonsense. Mrs. Meyer's. See what good can grow. Visit mrsmeyers.com today.
What they're saying is true, but there's one point to consider. Rudy didn't just hear noises. He heard a chilling scream, a scream that frightened him so much that he didn't flush the toilet or adjust his pants. He ran immediately to see what was happening. This suggests he sensed that something serious was going on. Let's take a step back and follow the judge's reasoning. The judge finds it strange that Rudy didn't have a condom. It may seem like a minor detail, but it's significant. I see there's a Team Rudy in the chat, but let's stay focused. Another important point the judge emphasizes is that there were condoms clearly visible in Amanda Knox's room. Condoms that Rudy couldn't possibly have missed, considering that, according to his story, both he and Meredith went into that room after Meredith accused Amanda of stealing her money. According to Rudy, they both went to Amanda's room to check, and the condoms were right there in plain sight. The judge then asks, if things happened as Rudy says, why didn't they use those condoms? There was no reason to stop the situation. This is another element that invites reflection. Also, there's a question about the layout that maybe hasn't been addressed enough. If you look on YouTube for videos of the crime scene, searching Meredith Kercher crime scene, you'll see that the hallway entrance is very narrow. If Rudy fell in the living room and kitchen, as he says, he couldn't have missed seeing whoever passed right by him, even just an inch away. They might not have touched him. Maybe he closed his eyes. But what he can't do is continuously change his story. First it's one man, then two men, then a man and a woman, and later Amanda and Raphael. This makes it hard to believe him. So I wanted to start this discussion by saying that, in my opinion, Rudy's account has too many problems. There are too many changes in his story, and too many things that don't fit. Another fundamental point I'd like to focus on is the evidence. There are some new pieces of evidence that we've never discussed before. Each piece of evidence tells a story. It's up to us to interpret it and understand where that story wants to take us. This episode is called Even the Evidence Lies, precisely for that reason. Because there's evidence that we might be interpreting in one way, but it could be telling a different story or may not actually reflect what really happened. Let me explain this better. We need to start from some solid points, certainties. We've already reflected on this in another episode, but I want to repeat it because it's crucial to establish these points clearly. The first thing we know for sure is that Rudy Guede was in that house while Meredith was still alive. We know this because Rudy went to the bathroom. In the bathroom where he defecated, there are no traces of blood, so we can deduce that Meredith was still alive at that moment. We don't know if she was inside the house or outside, but one thing is 110% certain. Rudy went to the bathroom while Meredith was still alive. This is a fact. Now, let's make an assumption. We don't know exactly what happened, but we can come up with some hypotheses. Let's imagine that while Rudy is in the bathroom, something occurs. Maybe someone comes in. It could be Amanda and Raphael, it could be another thief, or it could be someone else entirely. We don't know, but something happens, a huge commotion. And then Rudy runs away. Okay, it doesn't matter if it was him or not, but we know for certain that Rudy escaped, and therefore he couldn't have entered that house after Meredith's death. Why, you might ask? Because Rudy is covered in blood. His footprints are everywhere. There are shoe prints, and in his interview with Franca Leosini, he admits he was wearing Nike Air Force sneakers. The footprints lead from the front door to the path, where there are also stones with bloodstains that continue outside. The footprints are clearly his, confirmed 100%. If Rudy had gone to the bathroom after the homicide, there would have been blood traces, fingerprints on the toilet, or at least some sign in the bathroom. But that bathroom, where he left his stool, is completely intact. No blood traces at all. So we have no doubts about this. Then there's the whole issue of staging, which we talked about extensively in the previous episode. I'm absolutely convinced this is a staging, and I've discovered something very interesting. After 2007, thieves entered that house twice, and both times they came through the balcony, not the much talked about window. That window, which is 15 feet high, is visible from the street. If someone tried to climb up there, people would see them. However, behind the house, there's a lower balcony with more handholds that leads to a wooded area, making it invisible to passers-by. It's hard to imagine a thief choosing to climb that high window, accurately throwing a 9-pound stone, especially on a rainy night without leaving any mud or leaves behind. Plus, if a thief really had broken in to steal, why didn't they take anything? In my opinion, this is clearly a staging. That's why I believe the staging occurred after the homicide. However, it's strange that it was done without leaving any blood traces. This leads me to believe that the culprit, or culprits, cleaned up carefully. There are no traces of Rudy in that room, but there's one detail I discovered just today, something I didn't know before. Actually, I delved deeper yesterday and today and found an interesting detail. We talked about item 136. The defenders of innocence, particularly those linked to Amanda Knox, tend to exclude this item from their reconstructions. But it's important to note that in Filomena Romanelli's room, which is involved in the staging, there's a mixed trace of Amanda Knox and Meredith Kercher. We're not sure if it's blood or not, but the point is, this trace exists. This makes it more likely that Amanda Knox was present in that room, rather than Rudy Guede. Alberto, a listener, mentioned a hair found in the window, but it seems they couldn't determine whose it was, nor if it belonged to Amanda Knox or Rafael Solicito. If you have different information, please let us know, because I'm not an absolute expert on this case, and I think nobody knows all 400+ pieces of evidence by heart. So, there's a mixed trace of Amanda Knox and Meredith Kercher in Filomena Romanelli's room. It's a DNA residue that allows for extracting two distinct profiles, those of Amanda Knox and Meredith Kercher. There are also other interesting traces that emerged during the investigation. When the forensic police returned to the crime scene in December, about a month after the homicide, they used luminol, a substance similar to what we see on CSI, to detect possible cleanups. They noticed that the hallway had been thoroughly cleaned and that there were several traces. But I want to focus on one very debated trace, the one on the bathroom mat. To provide some context, remember that in the first episode, I mentioned Amanda Knox had come home around 10:30 after being at Solicito's place. She noticed some bloodstains on the bathroom mat and thought they might be the result of a lost earring or Meredith's menstrual cycle. In reality, that stain is a footprint, but it's only half of it, probably because the other half was cleaned off. The prosecution has always maintained that this footprint belonged to Solicito because it seems to match his shoes quite well. However, the fact that it's only half complicates identification. Some defenders of innocence, in a somewhat absurd theory, still insist that the footprint is Rudy Guede's. According to them, Guede, covered in blood, would have taken off his shoes to clean them and then entered the bathroom again with dirty feet, leaving the footprint on the mat. However, this theory doesn't seem to make much sense since Guede would have gone to the bathroom to clean himself, not to make the place dirtier. In summary, the prosecution has always attributed that bloody footprint on the bathroom mat to Raffaele Solicito. I reiterate that since this is a half footprint, it's difficult to establish its certainty at 100%. The defense has done an excellent job questioning the evidence, but they have never provided a convincing alternative reconstruction. Journalists and writers have proposed several theories, but the defense has focused solely on disputing the validity of the evidence, such as potentially contaminated DNA, the footprints, and the hook. Regarding the half footprint, the difficulty lies in the fact that it can't be definitively identified. Moreover, there are several erased footprints in the hallway. Yesterday, I read a reconstruction proposing a new theory, that Amanda Knox, Raffaele Solicito, and Rudy Guede were all involved in the homicide. I can't confirm whether this theory is true, but it's interesting to see how the reconstruction is based on circumstantial elements. We know for certain that Rudy Guede was in the house and in Meredith's room. The prosecution argues that Amanda Knox was present, given the mixed DNA of Amanda and Meredith in Philomena's room. There are also footprints of Amanda in the hallway that, according to the prosecution, have been erased. The defense responds that Amanda's footprints were to be expected since she lived there, but the prosecution claims that the footprint is bloody and has been cleaned. One detail that surprised me is the issue of the lamp. The new reconstruction I read suggests that it wasn't Rudy Guede, who, based on what we know, didn't return to the house, but rather the other two suspects, Amanda Knox and Raffaele Solicito, who might have returned during the night. To avoid drawing attention and risking being seen turning on the lights, they would have decided to operate in the dark. What did they do? They unplugged the lamp from Amanda Knox's room, a black desk lamp, and took it to the entrance area of Meredith Kercher's room, where it was found. This way, they managed to check and erase various traces and signs in the hallway without turning on the main lights. It's interesting to note that there are evident signs of cleaning in the hallway, as shown by the luminol stains, which indicate that someone attempted to remove traces.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
Blinds.com is kicking off the savings early with Black Friday mega deals all month long. A Blinds.com design expert can help you make the perfect selection on your schedule. We can even handle everything from measure to your whole home installed for just one low cost. With over 25 million windows covered, Blinds.com is the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings. Get up to 45% off site-wide and a free professional measure right now at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions may apply.
This would explain why, despite there being footprints in the hallway, many of them have been erased. Given the evidence, it's understandable why investigators considered Amanda Knox and Raffaele Solicito as possible perpetrators of the crime. The DNA of Solicito on Meredith Kercher's bra hook, the mixed DNA of Amanda and Meredith in Filomena Romanelli's room, the suspicious footprint of Solicito on the bathroom mat, and the staging in the house clearly indicate their possible presence at the crime scene. The concept of staging is particularly significant. If we consider that the alleged staging in the house could have been carried out by someone who lived there, it explains why that person would have tried to divert the investigation outside. This clarifies why many of the items found at the scene might seem incriminating for Amanda and Raffaele. However, there's a major discrepancy between the accusation of premeditation and Raffaele Solicito's suspicious computer activity. As Vanu, one of our listeners, points out, Solicito's computer activity is strange. He claimed to have been on the computer all night, but this isn't fully confirmed. He stated that he sent emails to professors and worked, but the defense argued that the laptops seized by the police were later tampered with or destroyed, complicating the confirmation or denial of his account. The defense has faced numerous challenges in countering the accusations, and one of the main problems has been the inability to present direct evidence. However, the defense has attempted to redirect attention to other points. We know for certain that there were no significant activities for about 3 hours. Even after this interval, Raffaele Solicito's computer went into sleep mode. But there's an interesting aspect. At 5:30 in the morning, the computer played music for about half an hour. This implies that someone was operating the computer during that time, which is a detail that is also referenced in the reconstruction I mentioned. According to this reconstruction, after committing the crime, the alleged culprits would have spent the night staging the scene. They returned home, which is just a 2-minute walk from Solicito's residence, and would have cleaned and tidied Filomena Romanelli's room. The reconstruction suggests that they then threw Meredith's cell phones into a nearby garden on Via della Pergola. This is a neighborhood close to both the girls and Solicito, as well as Guede. Solicito and Guede lived very close to each other, although they had never met. After tossing the phones, they would have quickly returned home, taken a shower, and washed the knife. The next day, a bleach smell was detected in the house, indicating that they had attempted to clean. They also played music to calm their nerves and then went to sleep. This overview suggests a series of well-orchestrated actions to hide the evidence. However, I still have a lingering question. If Amanda Knox and Raffaele Solicito were truly guilty, why didn't they manage to create a credible alibi? This aspect remains puzzling in the case. If they had planned the crime, and I emphasize that I personally don't believe it was premeditated, they should have also anticipated a solid alibi. Imagine if they had both claimed to have spent the night together at home, maybe watching a movie or engaging in other typical activities. A well-constructed alibi like that would have been much harder to refute. Instead, their accounts don't match up. When Solicito retracted his accusations, he stated that Knox was not home but had gone out with friends, while Knox never fully confirmed Solicito's alibi. This raises the question, why didn't they create a coherent alibi when they had time and opportunities to do so? Even if we assume that an unexpected tragedy occurred, perhaps under the influence of alcohol or stress, it seems odd that after arranging everything and spending hours cleaning and preparing the staging, they wouldn't find the moment to establish a believable alibi. If they had planned everything, they should have considered this aspect as well. On the other hand, Rudy Guede, despite leaving numerous pieces of evidence, did not have an accomplice to corroborate his version of events. This might explain why he found himself in a more difficult position compared to Knox and Solicito. However, if the two were truly guilty, one would expect them to have managed their defense better, including constructing convincing alibis. In summary, the lack of a solid alibi for Knox and Solicito, if they were guilty, and their difficulty in coordinating on this matter is a crucial point that continues to complicate and obscure the situation. Now, we reach a key point. Although we've discussed that the reconstruction from the first trial didn't make sense, the theory that Guede's sexual impulse triggered the chaos doesn't convince me. However, it's suggested that the three were in agreement. Is it possible that all three are guilty, I wonder? Could something have occurred that led to this tragedy? Let's talk about the solid points we've considered. For instance, we know that Guede was in the house when Meredith was still alive, and that someone later staged the scene to divert suspicion. I would add another fundamental element that we cannot forget. Based on what I've read and analysed, I believe that in the homicide, considering the injuries and the crime scene, there were at least 2, if not 3 attackers. If we put these points together, Guede was there beforehand, there was a staging afterward to divert suspicion, and we know that at least 2 or more people were involved, then the accounts start to align concerning the first-degree conviction. But, as we can see, the evidence doesn't always match up, and that's why this episode is called The Evidence Lies. Clearly, one or more of the pieces of evidence we have don't tell us the correct story, and we are misinterpreting this information. That's why we can't grasp the true scenario. The reconstruction raises several questions, If Rudy Guede was truly guilty, why was he in that house? He didn't have a special relationship with Amanda and Raffaele. Let's say, hypothetically, Guede went to their place, maybe to smoke some weed, and then chaos ensued that led to the tragedy. But why doesn't Guede say it was them and explain the situation clearly? And why do Amanda and Raphael never mention Guede? This is a fundamental issue. During the trial, across 5 levels of appeal, Guede was rarely mentioned as a witness, and only briefly. If all 3 were present, as the evidence might suggest, why don't the statements reflect this reality? The evidence clearly indicates that Guede was in the house, and the footprints suggest that the other 2 might have been there as well. But why did the Court of Cassation assert that only Guede was guilty while Amanda and Raphael were present, but not guilty? This ruling seems nonsensical if we consider that if they were present, they must be accomplices. Do you understand the complexity of this case? The evidence seems to point in one direction, but then there are other considerations that lead us in opposite ways. It's not illogical to think that only Guede was involved, as this thesis has its logic. However, the evidence suggests that more people could be implicated, but it doesn't clarify why Amanda and Raphael, if guilty, lack a solid motive or a certain murder weapon. Their behavior, the attempts to conceal evidence, and the contradictory evidence create multiple questions. Today, I wanted to present 2 additional elements: Amanda Knox's footprint in Filomena Romanelli's room and the highly probable footprint of Raffaele Solicito in the bathroom. We can't say for certain what happened, but it's time to consider that Amanda and Raffaele might have indeed been in the house. How can we reconcile this hypothesis with Guede's presence? I invite you to watch the video on YouTube by searching for Meredith Kercher crime scene. In the first 30 seconds, you'll find a view from the room and the hallway. Notice how narrow the space is and how difficult it could be to miss Guede if he passed through there. This is a fundamental question that raises many inquiries. Pietro raised an interesting point about the lamp. Does it make sense to think that, even though it was used for lighting, it might have been forgotten? It could be, but in such a chaotic crime scene, details can easily be overlooked. The lamp is a curious detail, but it may not have been a priority at that moment. I'd like all of you to send in your reconstructions of the case, trying to consider as many elements as possible. I still haven't found a reconstruction that accounts for all the details, and I'd like to see if any of you can piece them together convincingly. Of course, I look forward to seeing you in the next episode when we'll do a summary. Share the podcast, leave reviews, and I thank you all for participating. Have a good night, and see you in the next episode.